Hi, everybody. I'm Dan Wells. I write horror and science fiction and fantasy, and I also do a bunch of game videos on YouTube. Today is not a game review, this is me just talking about stuff. One thing that I mention every week is that I'm a professional game master in addition to being an author and a YouTuber and so on. And so somebody asked in the comments of one of last week's videos what it is like to be a professional game master. And I thought that that would be a really great topic for a video. And so there's a bunch of questions that they put into the comments, and I'm going to get to those and answer those in order. But let me give just some upfront stuff first. I I've been a professional author, full time novelist for about 12 years. And my first book is called I Am Not a Serial Killer. It was made into a movie a few years ago. It's really awesome, and I think you'll love it. Go watch it. But also buy the book. I Am Not a Serial Killer is my best selling book to date. I've done 18 since then, but none of them have kind of reached that level of cultural penetration that one has. Although, some of the more recent ones have been Audible bestsellers and things like that. So anyway, the point of all this story is that's what I do for a living, is I write and I tell stories. I am also a big, huge nerd, and I love playing games, and I love, you know, doing all that kind of stuff. And so several years ago, I want to say at this point it was 3, maybe 4 years ago, I met a woman at a local convention named Natasha Entz, and she has her own YouTube channel that I will try to find the info for and link to that. And she is also a professional game master. She's the first professional GM that I had ever met. Prior to that, I didn't know that that was a real thing. But it's something that she does, and she does very well. And so I've had the chance to become friends with her, and we've worked on a few projects together. And I've always thought that this would be a cool thing to try. One of the things that she says whenever people ask how she got into it is she will say, well, if you're good at something, there's going to be someone willing to pay you for it. And I thought, that in addition to being very brilliant and insightful, that's very hopeful because I do consider myself to be a pretty good game master. Maybe I could make some money on it. But crunching the numbers always kind of made me nervous. I It is difficult to find a level of payment that is truly worth your time. So, for example, and I'm not saying this to brag, I'm saying this because we're talking about money, and I think that it is important to be upfront. If anyone's watching this and says, I want to be a GM, you need to know the realities of what you're getting into. So, what I was. Let's backtrack just a little bit. So, it was the beginning of 2020. In fact, it was almost exactly a year ago when everything in March started to close down. Actually, a lot of my friends, other authors that I work with, we were all going to end up at Emerald City Comic Con in Seattle in early March. And Seattle, of course, is the first place in the U.S. to have a major COVID outbreak. And so we kind of day by day, we were watching the news, and we were, looking at the thing, and they'd say, oh, here's more infections, or there's been another death. And we were all wondering, should we cancel this or not? And then the convention canceled itself. And within the next few weeks, we watched all the dominoes fall of everything started canceling, and governments and businesses started saying, hey, everybody just stay home, let's get over this. You know what happened. You lived through it too. But the reason I bring it up is because we were all, kind of shocked. I go to between 10 and 15 Comic Cons every year because that's one of the main ways that I sell my books to people. I work with some, traveling bookstore booths and things like that. Main one is Bard's Tower. You can buy some books online with them. Big shout out to Bard's Tower. Anyway, now that I would not be traveling for the foreseeable future, and I didn't have that sales outlet, and I didn't have the time sink of travel anymore, that's when I thought, well, this is my chance to try pro GMing. Because not only is the timing kind of right for it, I'm able to stay at home, I'm looking for some extra income anyway. It's also a time when suddenly the whole country, the whole world arguably, was stuck at home. No one was getting human interaction except for with the people they actually lived with. I am, of course, referring specifically to people who followed all the rules. If you ignored all the rules and you went out and you just didn't care and never wore a mask or whatever, then whatever, you're a jerk. Um, but the people who were staying home, who are suddenly working from home, including a lot of close friends of mine who are single, they are all of a sudden just trapped at home alone. And I thought, this is the perfect time to dive in and try pro GMing and see if I can make it work. Because there is, for lack of a better term, a captive audience for this. The much more compassionate way of phrasing that is that there was now a demand for these kinds of services. People who wanted social interaction and would be willing, to hire somebody, to pay somebody and say, hey, I would love to put together a game group, and I don't have the resources to do that myself, but I do have some extra spending money, so I'll pay you to put that together and you to run it for me. And then we get to have this fun kind of weekly group that gets together and hangs out and has an awesome time. So that's what I was going for. And so I decided to try this. I was eventually convinced to charge $20 per person per hour. This is a lot more than you would spend on, say, Roll20. If you just went into the forums and looked for a paid game, they tend to be something like $5 a session or things like that. Those are not game masters who are trying to make a living off of this. If I want to justify this use of my time, it needs to be something that I can actually live on. I've got 6 kids. I have a mortgage. They want to eat 3 times a day. So, $20 per person per hour, which means that if I can get a 4-person group together, that I am making $80 an hour, which is a pretty good wage. Obviously, it's less than that because I have to do prep time as well. So it's not just, most of my groups tend to be 2 hours per week. But I have some that are, more, or some that are monthly. I have some that are less. There's a lot of variation in there. But that base price, $20 per person per hour, typically comes out to about $80 an hour for the session itself. And I have to take into account the prep time that I spend putting the adventure together, building maps if I'm going to be doing maps, prepping the story. Most of the time I tend to push people towards, games that are easy to run for this specific reason, but we can get into that later. Right now we're just talking about the money of it. From the player's side, if we are playing a weekly 2-hour session of a game, and to be clear, that's shorter than a lot of people would play if it was just your friends, right? You get all your buddies together, and you're probably going to do 3 or 4 hours. That's a more typical time frame. But not everybody has that kind of money, and I certainly don't have that kind of time. So I kind of push towards that 2-hour sweet spot. So if you're playing 2 hours a week at $20 an hour, then a player in an average month is going to be spending $160, which, let's put that into context, that's a lot of money. But, it's more than a gym membership, but it is less than, say, Taekwondo lessons that my son has. It's certainly cheaper than therapy, and I've heard a lot of people say that it fulfills a similar function. But anyway, if you have $160 worth of spendable money per month, which absolutely is far more than some people have, it is also far less than some people have. A lot of my clients, a lot of my players tend to be single professionals, often in the tech industry. If you live in California working in tech, you probably live in a tiny apartment. You probably have not been into your office in about 10 or 11 months. And so, an opportunity like this to have this weekly group where you get to have fun and see people and you're not responsible for something, you just get to relax and play, it's absolutely worth the 160 to you. Regardless of who can afford it, that is kind of the minimum that I was able to justify in order to take time away from my writing career, which I'm still doing. So that's what I do. And those are the financial decisions, the reasons that I made those. In hindsight, I think it's laughable that I had to be talked into $20 per person per hour. I was initially considering something much lower just because I didn't want to seem like I was, begging for too much money. But that's such a classic freelancer imposter syndrome decision. I remember when I used to be a freelance web writer who would help people put together websites and stuff. That was the first lesson I learned there, and it was the lesson I learned again here, which is charge what you're worth. Because somebody is going to be willing to pay for it, and you don't want to force yourself into a bad situation just because you don't want to say no to somebody or you don't want to seem greedy. You know what? Your time is valuable. Charge what you're worth. For me, in addition to the hourly rate, one of my considerations is player count. I did end up, because two of my players, I had a 4-person campaign, it was going great, we finished this huge story arc and it was awesome, and then 2 of the players had to leave because it was a married couple and they were having a baby. And it's entirely reasonable, wonderful reason, and I still, consider them friends and everything, but they had to step away. And at that time, what I should have done and didn't was say, we need to get 2 more people into this group. Because with only 2 players, suddenly I'm not earning that $80 an hour. I'm only earning $40 an hour. And I loved that campaign. I loved those 2 players. And so we kept that going for another 6 or 7 months. We actually only just wrapped it up a couple of weeks ago. But it was not as effective of a use of my time. And so, if you're going to be charging hourly like that, you need to consider also player count in there to make sure that you are getting the return on your investment of time and energy that you require in order to pay your bills, and so on and so on. Again, this is just classic freelancer wisdom. If you're doing something for money, you charge what you're worth. Anyway, so let's talk about the kinds of games that I run. And there's a bunch of questions. We'll get to those in a minute. In general, having now done this for a year, the kinds of games that I find myself gravitating toward as campaigns keep coming back to Dungeons and Dragons and Pendragon. And the reason those 2 work so well, first of all, is because the systems are really good. D&D 5, Pendragon 5.2, they're very solid systems. But more so than that, what they offer to me as the pro GM is very easy tools to help me run a game. With Roll20 and with D&D Beyond, and I've got like the full pro accounts on both of those, I have access to an incredible library of, all the source books, the adventures, published campaigns. All of the monster stats are close at hand, and then the tools to put them together with the encounter builder and then the combat tracker and things like that. They're incredible. Going to Roll20 and saying, we want to play this D&D game and we would like to do this campaign. Well, I can spend, a one-time purchase of $20 or $30, get the Curse of Strahd campaign, for example, and then I have all of the maps. I have, all of the character sheets. Roll20 has all of the roles kind of baked into their system. So it makes it very, very easy with minimal prep time on my part to run a professional, exciting, fun, accessible, visual game for people. Something like Fate Accelerated, and I did Dresden Files Accelerated for a long time. That is much more difficult to run because it doesn't have any of those resources. And so while the game itself is one that I love, it became, I don't want to say onerous, but it became difficult week after week to come up with exciting and new ways to challenge the players. You know, in D&D, I'm able to just open up the list of monsters and say, well, let's throw these together. This would make a good level appropriate encounter for them. With something else that doesn't have those web resources, I had to come up with everything on my own. And it was worth it, and I loved that campaign. It just took a lot more prep time than D&D did. Now, I also mentioned Pendragon, and the reason that I love Pendragon, not only is it a great game that I love and talk about all the time, but because of the structure of the campaign, each adventure, so to speak, is supposed to be a discrete episode, and most of them are fairly short. And so I didn't have to, when I run that one, I don't have to worry about, are we going to be able to finish this in time? How do I save the game state if we're halfway through a dungeon or something like that? It's easy to, open it up and say, okay, the year is 486. There's these battles, there's these feasts, okay, go. And it's a much simpler game to run, and that kind of discrete pacing of it makes it very easy with, again, minimal prep time. And so the less prep time I have, the more time I can spend on other games, the more time I can spend on my other job of writing books. So there's considerations like that. Now, I still enjoy doing other things. I run a 7th Sea campaign, which doesn't have any web resources at all. I used to run, I actually just, it ended for me last week, but Star Trek Adventures. And so there's a lot of different other things that are going on. I'm doing the One Ring campaign, though that one is similar in nature to Pendragon in some ways because it is a yearly idea. Anyway, the point is that there's, in addition to the money, in addition to the player count, you've got to think about prep time. Because if you spend too much time prepping, that hourly wage goes down and down and down until maybe it is no longer viable. So you have to think about all of these things because they're not going to pay you for prep time. You have to bake that cost into the actual playtime. Anyway, let's talk about advertising and promotion, and because a lot of people I know ask about this question as well. If you want to become a pro GM, how do you find players? You can look for players through something like Roll20, though it can be difficult, like I said, because there are already people on there who just want to play for fun. There are some people who charge very, very low, like $5 or $10 a session kind of stuff. I don't know how they make that work, but there's a lot of people out there who do it. For me, I don't know if I have a really replicable system to recommend to you because I am already a New York Times best-selling author with, a lot of Twitter followers and, that sort of thing from my other group. One of my best friends in the world is Brandon Sanderson. We've known each other for 20-something years, long before either of us were published. And so I have gone twice now onto his weekly live YouTube thing to talk about my books and to drum up business for my GMing. And not everybody can do that. You can't just ring up one of the most famous fantasy authors in the world and say, hey, can I come advertise on your show? I understand that that's not something everybody has access to do. And so I don't really have great advice on how you would advertise your own pro GMing business. In a non-quarantine situation, I know that there are a lot of professional GMs who put up notes in the local game store. And that is conceivably something you could still do now. Although at this point, most of your games are going to be digital anyway. So, building a website or an Instagram or a social media account and then just, trying to do that typical web platform thing where you try to get people to pay attention to you and buy your product, that could be a way to do it as well. If you know a specific group of people, or if you have access to a type of group of people, like if you work in the tech industry and you have a lot of friends who are single professionals with a lot of disposable income and they're stuck at home not interacting with anybody, that's a group you could hit up and try to see what they can find. I don't have great advice for how to promote because how I promote is hard to do. Anyway, let's go and let's answer the questions. Now, this is Grim Ace who put these into my YouTube channel. He says, "Is the life of a professional GM like that of a regular entertainer, i.e., karaoke DJ, or a psychotic clown, aka Joker?" I don't know. No, it's not. I mean, you see behind me, this is my office. I used to put up green screens and everything when I did these videos, and it's extra time that I don't have. If I can crank one of these videos out without having to spend 10 minutes to set up the perfect green screen and find the background image and all these things, then yay, the video quality is the same. It just looks different. So I sit here often in my pajamas. Today my 5-year-old chose my clothing for me, so I'm wearing a Cracker Jack shirt. I don't know. I've been a professional entertainer for 12 years, and it's mostly just sitting alone in an office typing. This is slightly different because I end up with 1 or 2 extra Zoom meetings per day in which I am, guiding a group of people as they beat up a goblin or whatever. But I wouldn't say it's anything like karaoke DJ. I definitely have a tendency to talk a lot. I'm kind of losing my voice. I did a 2-hour Pendragon session before recording this video, and I recorded the 2 other videos that aired Tuesday and Wednesday. And so it's a lot more talking than I'm used to. But other than that, it's just doing a job. Is it lucrative? It is. I don't know if I'd say that it's lucrative. I am at the level, charging what I charge, where it pays for my mortgage and a little more on top. It doesn't pay the whole mortgage and the whole grocery bill, but it pays the whole mortgage and a chunk of the grocery bill. It's definitely worth my time to do it, but that's because I made sure from the beginning to establish the right kinds of expectations for myself and the right kinds of goals and the right kinds of prices to make sure that it would actually earn me money. So I'm not getting rich off of this by any means, but it is something that I enjoy doing, something that is easy for me, and for which I am being compensated at a pretty fair rate, I would say. So there you go. What does it take to be one, a pro GM, as opposed to being just a normal dude doing a regular DMing session with friends? Can anyone do it? Well, it kind of does just mostly feel like being a regular DM for your friends. I try, obviously, to maintain as professional of an attitude as I can, which means that I am not going to cancel a session at the last minute. I am not going to do a bad job because I'm having a bad day. I have to treat it like a job. And if people are paying me money, then I am obligated to be as entertaining as I can. But, and this was a big kind of hurdle for me to get over initially, because what I assumed would feel very much like a, client and employee relationship is not. It does really feel like these are my friends. I have become friends with everyone that I've played a game with, because when you spend 2 hours a week talking to each other and laughing and joking and playing a role playing game, you do become friends. I consider them all friends at this point. And so it's there isn't that kind of invisible barrier that a monetary transaction often implies. I know that as long as I'm doing the best I can and I am providing people with, the entertainment that they feel that so that it feels like a good use of their time and money, there's that's great. There isn't this sense of that you have to dance for me because you're my monkey kind of idea. No one treats me like a waiter or a clerk. I'm just the nice guy that they play a game with, and like I said, we become friends. Is this online or face to face? I have met several professional GMs who used to do mostly face to face stuff, and now they've had to adapt to online. Like I said, my plan for this came about because I knew that online digital stuff was going to be the big hit during the quarantine. So I've actually never done this live except for a couple of times when we've appeared at conferences. And that was just with my Twitch show, not with my, not with my paid group. And prior to the pandemic. Thank you for that word. So yeah, I do it all online, and mostly that is through Zoom, and occasionally I use Roll20. There are a lot of other online gaming tabletop portals like Fantasy Grounds and all these other things. Roll20 is the one that works really well for me. I have nothing bad to say about the others. They're probably awesome. I just haven't used them. So Roll20 is the one, and like I said, D&D Beyond is just a phenomenal gaming tool. So I use that a lot too. But for video, even when I play on Roll20, I typically use Zoom for the video because it's just more stable than Roll20's video is. I will use Roll20 for proprietary dice rolling, something like Star Trek Adventures that uses weird dice that not every player has in their house. Roll20 automates that process and looks really good while it does it, so it's a really good solution to play that way. Roll20 also can keep track of character sheets. It has a really robust map and token and movement system that even includes dynamic lighting, so like they can only see what their token can see. There's a lot of good reasons to use those, so that's what I do. Next question. Do you give players options of all the games in your repertoire, or do you compromise with a balance between what they want and what you want? I don't think that we have ever compromised on something. I definitely, every time, will give a list of what I currently want to play. Games that I think work well online, games that I love and I haven't had a chance to play recently. But at the end of the day, it is the player's decision. They're the ones paying for this. We're going to play what they want to play. More often than not, that's going to be D&D 5. I mean, it is the most popular role-playing game in the world by such a massive margin. Far more than half of my games are D&D 5. Just because that's what people have watched on Critical Role. That's what they have seen on Stranger Things. That's what they've been hearing about since the 80s. It's the most famous and it's the most popular one. I do have, I talked about some of the other games that I play. I will always give people a list. Like, I would love to play Infinity. I'd love to play Warhammer Fantasy. I would love to play The One Ring. I would love to play Pendragon. I currently have 2 Pendragon sessions because I've been pushing that one so hard. But if people don't want to play it, I'm not going to find a compromise. I'm just going to say, well, what do you want to play? And if that's something like Pathfinder, we'll play Pathfinder. I actually have taught myself a role-playing game with Fate Accelerated just because that's what the client asked for. That's what the players wanted, was Dresden Files Accelerated. So I went out and I bought the game and I learned how to play it. And it helps that it's a really smooth, awesome game system. But that's what I do. Is uh, let the players decide what they want to play. I will provide options, but at the end of the day, it's their choice. Also, this is another question. As being paid, your threshold of making fun must be dynamic and professional. So my question is, how do you achieve this balance successfully? What does failure look like? I mean, if you're a good game master, you're a good game master. It is not a different enough system when you're doing it professionally that all of a sudden the old rules don't apply. If you can entertain your friends around the table, you can entertain a group of strangers around a Zoom as well. It's the same basic skills. And, failure, what does failure look like? Failure looks like I have not prepared, or I have, I am not treating this professionally. I am not going out of my way for you. As long as I make sure that, that I have something ready for the players to do, that I make sure people are nice to each other, that I, keep the story interesting, then everything else falls into place. I think it is a misperception to expect that someone who pays a game master is going to sit back and expect to be passively entertained, right? Because that's kind of what we expect. If we're paying someone for a book or for a movie or to watch a play, then yeah, we're just going to sit there and you dance for our pleasure the whole time. But a role-playing game is so interactive that the dynamic is very different, and the players are as engaged in their own enjoyment as you are. And if somebody were to come into it and just sit back and say, well, I'm paying you $20 an hour, I expect you to, to entertain me, they're not going to have fun because they're not fully participating in the game at that point. They're just watching somebody else play D&D. And yeah, of course they're not going to enjoy that. So it isn't as big of an issue to kind of constantly be entertaining as you might be expecting. Okay, last question, unrelated but also related. As a writer, I know where this question's going. You must likely have your mind set on a story with start, middle, and end. How do you allow the PCs to have the freedom to override your original design? I actually don't. I run into this now and then with Star Trek adventures. I do have a tendency when I run Star Trek to design each session as an episode of the show, which means that I do have an end in mind. I would like it to wrap up, and I would like to have a kind of Star Trek-y style climax, stinger, moral, whatever it is at the end of that. And I have watched a couple of my Twitch sessions kind of thud a little bit because I am expecting a type of ending that the players don't go for. In every other case, though, I don't have a story in mind. And that's one of the things that I love about role-playing games, is that they are a collaborative storytelling effort. I do genuinely love the process of watching a story form out of nothing as a bunch of different people start contributing ideas and emotions to it. I will have, I will definitely provide people with the building blocks. We know where this story is headed. We kind of know what this story includes. Here's all these NPCs you can interact with. And maybe the one that I think is the most interesting, they are bored by and they go off and they talk to somebody else. Or maybe the choice of how to solve a problem that I think is the most entertaining, they could not possibly be less interested in it, and they have their own completely different ideas of how to solve the problem. That's just the core of game mastering in general, is learning how to roll with those punches. Now, it might be that if I were not also an author, that I did not have a separate solo storytelling outlet, maybe I would be a little more forceful with the kinds of stories that I try to tell through role-playing games. Maybe. I don't know. But because those are my two jobs, my two sources of income, I have the one where I can tell my story exactly the way I want it. And then I have the role playing games where I just get to be along for the ride and watch other people take my toys and turn them into a story of their own. And I think that's what makes a really good game master, is the ability to be as excited about other people's ideas as they are, to watch them put together this great, background, this tapestry of story and emotion and character relationships that they are building on their own, rather than me saying, okay, this is the big fight scene. It's going to work best if you sacrifice yourself and if you, learn this valuable moral lesson. Like, that's never going to work in a collaborative environment. You have to kind of step back and let the players tell their own story that you are facilitating, rather than controlling or directing. And yeah, it's hard, but that's hard for everyone, not just for pros. And like I said, being an author, being a writer, actually makes me more interested in the collaborative aspects, because that's the part I don't get to do during my other job. So anyway, that's what I have to say about professional game mastering. It is a lot of fun. I love doing it. There is more money in it than I expected. But if you are going to try to support an entire family doing it, you need to make sure that you can charge enough. I definitely don't think anyone should go quit their job and say, I'm going to get rich pro GMing. But if you've got some free time, say every Thursday night, you've got that off, set some realistic prices that you think are viable for yourself. Say, if I were to charge this much, it would be a good use of my time. I would be making money instead of breaking even. Then dedicate that Thursday night to it. See if you can find some players. Go online, root around on Roll20 or Reddit or something. See if you can drum up some players. And if it works, use that word of mouth and try to get some more people, and dedicate another night to it. Or even just try a one-shot. Say, hey, I'm going to run the starter adventure in the Alien RPG, Hadley's Hope. It's a really cool horror story. Who wants to be a part of it? Get a bunch of people together. I probably shouldn't recommend that your test run for this be anything other than D&D 5, because that's what most people are going to want. But anyway, so that's it. That's my professional GMing story. Thank you for watching this video. I hope that it has helped illuminate some of what I do for a living, but also maybe inspired somebody to try doing some pro GMing on their own. Also, if you've watched this whole thing, and say, maybe I want Dan to run a game for me, hit me up. I am, very busy, but I always have a slot here and there of where I could fit players into an ongoing campaign. There is one more that I'm trying to start right now for the One Ring. Or actually Mutants and Masterminds would be a really great one. That one's been requested recently as well. So anyway, if you want to play a game with me, let me know. There's contact information in the video notes below. So thanks for watching. I am Dan Wells, and you are awesome.